Hello, I'm Dr. Terry James Gingras, and this is Dr. G's ADHD Chat, a show trying to make the world safe for ADHDers. I am a clinical neuropsychologist and partially retired, and I am also the father of a couple of ADHD kids. And I've married into a long line of ADHDers, and it's a kind of a wild ride. Okay, today I'd like noticing the calendar. Pretty soon we're all going to be faced with summer without school. And I usually do a session or two about that. And so this year, we are going to talk about how some good things about summer and time off, and how you can do some things that will help make school easier for you next year. Okay, the big deal you don't want to do is just say, whoopee, friggin' school's over, no schedules, no routines, don't have to get anywhere, let's let it go. Not a good idea, okay? Because eventually, when fall hits and you have to go back to school, you have to retrain rather, all those different routines and schedules back in. And it's a funny thing about the way behavior goes to a routine and then becomes a habit, okay? But it only works if you keep doing it. Well, the minute you disrupt it, you start to lose it, and then you're basically having to start all over again. So keep as many of the really important habits as you can, and that's basically bedtimes. First of all, one of the things that you tend to lose control over is, just let them stay up for a little bit. Well, once in a while, that's not a big deal. But if you do it all the time, then guess what's going to happen when school starts? The other thing is on the other side of the day, when getting up in the morning, you can be a little more lax about exactly when they have to get up, but you don't want to just totally say, sleep to noon every day if you want to. That's a hard habit to give up once they get going on it. So you need to have bedtime and wake up times kind of as close to the same as you can, and in this era when we have a lot of two-income families and that sort of thing, it's even more important. So keep that routine pretty much the same. And the other one is meal times. Meal times are ideally in an idyllic world, I guess, a time for the family members to get together and, share the plans for the day in the morning and share the accomplishments of the day during the day. But it's important to kind of keep those times the same, especially breakfast and dinner. Of course, dinner is going to get disrupted by sports occasionally, and that's okay. But you have to generally try to toe the line, because that's a real important time. Especially dinner is the time where you can rehash the day and all that stuff. By the way, though, dinner is not a star chamber proceeding. That's not the time to go over everything that your ADHD or the other kids who don't have ADHD have done wrong all day. That's not the time. The time is that share things to show that you're interested in their lives, and that time to teach them how to present a cogent argument and talk about what were you reading today? What was that comic book? I haven't comic book. I hadn't thought of that. Do kids read comic books anymore? I know when I was a kid, every kid on the block had a bunch of comic books, and the guy who was most popular was the one who had a stack that reached up almost to a tabletop. And because his was the house you went to when it was raining outside, you couldn't play, so you just sit there. We used to take the packets of Kool-Aid and just eat them directly. But anyway, you want to encourage reading, you want to encourage thinking, you want to encourage learning, knowing about stuff, that sort of thing. Uh, and you want to reward responsibility and planning and all those good things all the time. And summer, there's a lot of times you're going to basically catch them doing something that you say, oh, that's really, really cool. Or, boy, you mowed the lawn really, you did a good job this time, and that sort of thing. And you got to give them a certain amount of responsibility. Like my youngest was forever staying out late. He'd come home when it was dark, which was a little upsetting. So he was 7 years old. We bought him a watch, and then we bought him a watch with an alarm, and we'd set the alarm for when he was supposed to be home for dinner, and let him go. We didn't bother punishing him for coming in late or that sort of thing. We just made it so it was easy to recognize that it was time for him to be somewhere else than where he was. Now, the thing about that now is, back then we were doing it just because it was practical, but now we know that ADHDers have a horrible time with managing time and time awareness, and they just kind of lose track of it all the time. So that worked, and that was before we knew why we were doing what we were doing. It was just one of those things that he wasn't very good at coming home on time, so we made it easier for him to come home on time. There's other things, you can use summer for is like, one year, my older boy, he had a real hard time it was a semester project that, I don't know if they called it a semester project, but that's basically what it was. It was one of those that was due in 3 or 4 weeks, or from the time it was assigned. And he never got around to doing it. And we got this call from the teacher. Oh, he didn't turn it. Well, it turns out, and this was my middle child, so he's the one that's kind of always in the background, playing bass or drums in the band, that kind of stuff. He couldn't make up his mind. So he never made a decision. So it wasn't that he couldn't read or he couldn't write a report. It's that he just couldn't decide what book he was supposed to read out of this whole list of things. So we gave him a list of books, and we said, okay, every week I want you to read a book and write us a little report, not a big multi-pager, but just a little report about the thing. And he did, and he had to make the decision every week which book to read. I'm not saying he never messed up, but he generally got much better at making decisions about things like that. And so it was, there are a lot of things you can help you. You got to be paying attention during the school year. What specific problems are we having? What specific kinds of things are not working out well that we probably need to improve before next year? In that case, just him trusting his decisions was an important thing for him to learn. And it was a very successful intervention. And I credit my wife totally for even the idea. Of course, the other thing that has to happen regularly, even in the summer, is chores that need to be done. We had 3 kids, and depending on how old they were various things that they could or could not do. The biggest problem regularly had them do was clean off the plates from dinner and wash them. Somebody was the lead and washed them, and somebody else helped clear the table and that sort of thing. But they need to have chores and they need to have a sense of responsibility about it. And we always tried to present it as, this helps the family out. It's just a little something that you can do that makes life easier for all the rest of us. Um, and we didn't necessarily pay for doing, well, we didn't pay for doing chores. That was we provide a roof over your head and food. Okay, fine, don't mess with that. So it was never a tit for tat kind of thing. It was always, this is just something you need to start doing. There are all those things that they need to learn. Uh, you know, Little things like uh, stacking plates. How clean do you have to get dishes before so they get clean in the dishwasher? Or if we don't have a dishwasher, we were a military family, so we moved around a lot, and sometimes things were not as wonderful as they could have been, but we had to make do with it, and they learned a lot from just watching us do that. So the other things, and really important things, is that we have this sort of separation between education, school, and real life, and we don't do a real good job of making the transition. And the way stuff is taught is like, okay, why am I doing 20 adding addition problems? Why am I doing that? What's the deal? Or why am I doing what is it, proofs for geometry? Well, ideally, it's to teach you to think, to teach you to be logical and provide logical procedures to different things you're going to have to do in life anyway. You're going to have to know mathematics, at least simple, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, at least that much, probably a little bit more. I know when I was seeing a lot of ADHD teenagers there for a while, I had a run of, just a bunch of them. I was like, why do I have to dig geometry? I'm never going to use that. What the heck? And I thought, I always used to tell them, okay, you don't think you'd ever use geometry. Have you ever watched This Old House? Have you ever watched how the carpenter figures out the angles he's going to cut the wood at so he can make the roof, or he's going to make the porch so it fits into the roof? I've forgotten what his last name is, Bob something or other. Anyway, man, that man used more math than I've used in my whole life, probably. And, it was fascinating, but it was geometry. It was, how to get the right angle to do stuff. And I said, oh, look at that. Did you do, and I'd check with him next week. Did you watch that show? Yeah, but yeah, you do a lot of that stuff. So, why does the school not teach them why they're doing stuff? They just don't. I did geometry because I didn't want to get into trouble, but I was never exactly sure what the heck I was going to do with it. And I was good at it. I had a teacher who was a little bit past her prime. And so a lot of times when we're doing the proofs, which if you're not familiar in geometry, that's one of the things where you take all these rules and you apply them the way you're supposed to in a sequence that gets you the right answer. She'd get confused, and then she'd call me up, and I would teach the rest of the class on how to do that proof. And I never really thought much about it, but it's like, yeah, that was really for me, that was a good experience. And I'm not saying you have to do that with your child. You may not be a particular, you may not know anything about carpentry, so that's not going to work for you. But there are other things. my dad was a golf pro. Sports were real important in my family, and sports are real important for ADHD families. And summers, summer you have a lot of baseball, some soccer, swimming, uh, golf, tennis, all kinds of stuff. Uh, the only thing I would recommend is if you have a real hyperactive child, baseball is probably not the best thing for him unless he's playing catcher or pitcher, or maybe first base, and maybe the infield in general. But if you put him out in right field, he's going to be picking up flowers and whatever he can find out there and looking at the ants and all that stuff. And he ain't going to be in the game. He's going to, he'll hear the crack of the bat maybe, and oh. So something that's more continuous action. Uh, there's, well, I mean, most every other sport is pretty good for an ADHD child, and it sort of depends. Um, in my house, baseball was real important. Uh, my dad had a friend who was the equipment manager for the Boston Red Sox, so I got to go to a lot of games at Fenway Park, uh, and then in the off season we'd go into Boston and watch a hockey game in the afternoon, and then watch a Boston Celtics game in the evening, and that was very stimulating and made me really excited about playing sports and that sort of thing. And sports are real important if you think about what it's teaching you, And one of the things that you really there's a thing in psychology, we call it successive approximation. In coaching, they call it make a layup before you start shooting 3-pointers, basically. But the idea is that you take any task and you break it down into the simplest components, and you get good at the simplest ones, and then you make it a little harder and a little harder and a little harder, excuse me, and you then eventually get the full whatever thing you're trying to do done. So like if you want to play basketball, you start close. You learn to make a layup. That's what you call it when you're real close to the basket, and you learn how to, bounce it off the backboard so it goes in and that sort of stuff. And then you move back, and eventually, and then you make a free throws. Then you go back and you try 3-pointers. But you got to, ideally you don't do that. Little kids, like 5 years old, probably aren't going to be shooting many 3-pointers. They shouldn't be. They're not strong enough to get it up there. But they learn that you practice, you get better, you practice some more, you get a little better. That's important. That's an important life lesson for everybody. And sports, interestingly enough, are good places to think about physics. Like, how do you throw a curveball? Well, you throw a curveball by coming over and snapping your wrist down so the ball spins like this, and it gets more friction on this side, which pushes it over to this side. Okay, and the same thing like with a tennis racket. You hit the ball pulling the head of the racket in, it spins the ball so it gets real soft and drops down. Or if you bring the racket over, you'll be pounding the drive. Those are all things that are physics, basically, but it's a lot easier to teach a ADHD physics if you're on the tennis court or on the baseball field, where there's always lots of action associated with it. But that's one of those things we could do easily in the classroom, but we don't. I have no idea why. But sports are real important for a lot of reasons. Social skills are developed playing sports. at least team sports. Team sports, you have to um, know how to get along with people and try to encourage them all the time, even if they're making mistakes. Because you see it when it first starts. Little kids. Oh, well, he missed the ball. We lost the game because of him. And then and then you hear like professional athletes who've been playing these sports for most of their lives. They don't do that. Oh, he was trying hard. He did. He was. It'll work out. He'll by the end of the season he'll be doing that, making that play every time. Uh, you don't hear him saying, "Geez, I don't know why that guy's even on the dang team. He's da da da." That's a good lesson for an ADHDer to learn, and also ADHDers tend to be pretty good at sports. They tend to, they've got these reflexes that are going 90 miles an hour all the time, and they run faster, hit harder, and sometimes see the opportunity much easier than a neurotypical kid. That's not a general rule by a long shot, but they do seem to have an advantage there. Being a little bit impulsive, that can get you into some trouble, on some ball fields, but it can make you do some things you weren't sure you could do when you're up playing on a football field. Say, oh, God, I didn't know I could get around that guy, but I did. And it's the thing about sports also is I used to hear when I was a kid that sports are all about life. Well, it kind of is. The thing you do is you come into a situation, you're maybe not as good as you could be at whatever that job say, but you can get better because you did it with baseball, or you did it with swimming or whatever. But you learned some things, some valuable lessons about yourself. I can get better. I can do more. That is really the first step in resilience. And that's I emphasize that a lot because resilience is incredibly important for an ADHD child. It as an ADHD, you're going to have to understand that you're probably going to make some more mistakes than most people do, and that's okay. Nobody dies. Well, unless you're a surgeon, I suppose, but nobody dies, and it's important that you have them learning that they can improve, they can learn from errors, mistakes. They have the potential, if they're willing, if they have been taught to use that way of thinking about things and thinking about themselves, if they do it, then they can go as far as basically as far as their desires take them. Oh, by the way, I am not a fan of participation trophies in any way, shape, or form. That's kind of defeats the whole purpose of playing a game. But I'm not going to get off on that too much, but it's just it just makes kids think, oh, why should I make any effort? I mean, it doesn't really matter. I get a trophy anyway, if my whole purpose in playing the game is to get a trophy. But that's not a good life lesson to learn. It doesn't matter. That's a bad one. And your kids, they learn more from the things that go wrong or the things where they got hurt. I'm never going to run my bicycle off that jump again, I guarantee you. All kinds of things like that. My son, of course, was the one who always went off the jump. Okay, and the other biggie in sports is the sportsmanship thing. Okay, you're not always going to win. Your teammates are not always going to make the play. Sometimes they're going to make mistakes. Sometimes the ball's going to jump over their head. You just have to be able to get on with that and encourage them so that they do better the next play. And sports is just another word for sportsmanship, rather, is just another word for ethical behavior. I do what I do to help my team win. I do what I do to be the best I can be. I do what I do to see if I can get better. Um, those are all worthy things to teach your child. And so I highly encourage sports for your children. Um, and I can't do this without talking about one other thing. Screen time. Okay. When I was a kid, we didn't have to worry about screen time because the only screen we had in my house was a television set that I swear weighed about 300 pounds. All these iPads and all the other screens, and yeah, we have a problem, and we're noticing it. Screen time is not actually it's being criticized severely in educational settings, and that's really where it got increased. All of a sudden, every school is handing out some kind of iPad kind of thing. Obviously, I'm an Apple guy, but then they're finding out that the kids' academic skills are decreasing. The Nordic countries, of course, they're the most logical, scientifically oriented countries on the planet, and they pulled those things out of their school system when the reading scores started to deteriorate. It teaches immediate gratification, and it teaches so you're not very patient. If something's coming at you, at 0.1 second intervals, you get used to that. But when it's slower, which most of life is, you don't have the patience. You haven't learned to wait. And I always joke that I'm not ADHD, but I am impatient, and and I am, so I try to minimize the amount of time I spend on a screen, especially if I'm not doing anything productive, if I'm not researching a problem or that sort of thing. And your child needs to have that same attitude, and you need to control the amount of screen time they have, and you need to set a firm limit. And remember, it's not a birthright to play whatever game it is as long as you want to. That doesn't happen anywhere in the world. But you have to make sure that you set a limit and stand by the limit. That's it. And I mean, there are some people that are involved in the whole computer world who don't let their kids have any kind of a device until they're 12 years old. I'm not sure why 12, but hey, that's what I've been reading. And that's one of those things that you want to have decided, and let that be known early. Don't wait until I want to play my game. No, tell them early. Tell them several times early in the day, early and before school lets out. Set the limits on screen time. That's important. So, okay, and I am now officially out of new stuff to talk about. I will think on this a little bit over the break and between shows, and maybe I'll come back with some more, and maybe I won't. I don't know yet. Okay, if you've got any ideas about that subject in any way, please let me know. I'm available on, well, you can get me online or at my website, terrygingrassphd.com. And you can do some questions, and I'll try to answer them. And if you got any suggestions for things I should have included in this show, or Other things you'd like me to talk about, please let me know. And you also can sign up for my newsletter there. My newsletter is totally different copy information than this show, so it's not like you'd be getting the same thing a couple of different ways. Okay, again, terrygingrassphd.com, and I will catch you on the other side.